All right.
Okay.
I think you're sharing the opposite screen. You should be able to switch screens. We're seeing your slideshow view rather than the full screen version.
Great. I don't know how to switch that.
Go over to the very far left where it says from beginning and click on that on the top. There you go, that one. Click on the, not that one, from the beginning, go all the way over. That, yes, click on that. That should do it.
Oh, there's just a couple slides. That'll be fine.
I'm sorry, I don't know how to get to the full screen.
I think it'll be fine.
Okay.
Shall we get started? I haven't seen people rolling in as much. I think we're starting to get full here. So.
Okay.
All right. Well, I just wanted to start off by welcoming everyone. My name is Kat Wolfing, and I am the Assistant General Manager of the Mid-Peninsula Water District. So, we're really happy to be able to host this presentation along with BOSCA. The topic is so important, and at Mid-Pen Water, we really value water conservation and really, even less than conservation, just promoting water efficiency as good stewards of our limited resource. So not just, in times of drought, but all the time, focusing on being good stewards. So we're really glad to have Juanita here. And so I'll hand it over to Brandon Spears, who is our water resources coordinator with the district. He manages our water conservation program, as well as supports our efforts in supply and demand planning.
Thank you, Kat. So hello, everyone. My name is Brandon Spears, and as Kat mentioned, I am the Water Resources Coordinator here at Mid-Peninsula Water District. I want to start by saying that we here at the district are so excited to speak with you all today on the topic of native and drought-tolerant plants. We are also so excited to take in all of the great knowledge and information that Juanita will be sharing with us all today. Juanita is a certified landscape architect who has specialized in helping people and communities create and install native plant pollinator habitats. Okay, so the next slide. Before we begin, I just want to let you guys know that we're going to be muting you all, and please reserve your questions for the end of the Zoom. We will be answering all the questions that come in the order that they are received. So just a little background on BOSCA. BOSCA stands for the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Area, or Conservation Agency. Mid-Peninsula is one of the 26 agencies that BOSCA represents. BOSCA assists us in purchasing and negotiating for our water from the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. BOSCA member agencies provide 1.8 million people and over 40,000 businesses and community organizations in Alameda, Santa Clara, and San Mateo County. BOSCA's goal is to provide high quality supply of water at a fair price. So what are we hoping you take away and learn from this presentation today? We're hoping that you take away that outdoor water use represents the largest untapped opportunity for water conservation in the Bosca service area, and outdoor water use reduction through the use of water efficient plant and innovative techniques can help conserve water and ensure that future water supply needs of our communities are met. So some additional ways to save some water at the home. For those of you interested and that reside in Mid-Peninsula Water District service area, we currently have several rebates that we believe can help you conserve water at home. We are offering $4 per square foot to individuals that are interested in replacing their lawns with a drought tolerant and water efficient landscape through our Lawn Be Gone rebate program. We are also offering individuals a rebate of up to $200 for the purchase and installation of water collection rain barrels through our Rain Barrel rebate program. Here's another set of rebate programs that we're offering. We are currently offering smart controller rebates for Rachio devices. A Rachio smart irrigation controller can save you up to 50% of your outdoor water use. It's compatible with almost any irrigation system and allows you to control your sprinklers from your mobile device. MPWD customers can receive this premium smart watering device at a discounted price of $100 plus the tax that's included. And the one on the right-hand side, the Rain Garden, this is one of the newer rebates that has been released. We are offering optional Rain Garden rebates, which could result in customers receiving a rebate of up to $300. Rain gardens are a great way to reduce localized flooding, standing water issues, and stormwater leaving your property. Rain gardens can also provide food and shelter to butterflies, birds, and other pollinators in the area. And so here's a list of some upcoming events that are going to be put on by Bosca. If you have any interest in these webinars, feel free to go to the Bosca website. These Bosca webinars can be registered and accessed under the Water Conservation tab. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Juanita, and I'll let her take it away.
Thank you, Brandon. Let me share the screen. Okay, hi everybody. As Brandon said, I am Juanita Salisbury, and I am a California licensed landscape architect here in California. And I also have a degree in biopsychology in which I studied ingestive behavior, and that sort of now guides the way that I design as a landscape architect. I do a lot of installation of public gardens here in Palo Alto where I live, and I try to disseminate information through various means, social media being one of those. We have both Facebook and Instagram pages, which is the Primrose Way Pollinator Garden. I also have a YouTube channel, Primrose Way. And for those of you who don't like social media or YouTube, I have a website, which is primrosewaypollinatorgarden.com. All right, and so as I mentioned before, I do install and maintain and monitor several gardens here in Palo Alto, and I encourage people to come and visit these gardens. They're in public spaces, and so they're available to visit anytime. They're open 24/7. This is a map of Palo Alto with Embarcadero Road here coming in. This is going west. Our first garden was the Primrose Way Pollinator Garden, and that was followed by the Island Drive Garden, Arcadia Place, Hopkins Avenue Pollinator Garden, Gwynda Street Pollinator Garden, and two new ones, the West Greenwich Place and the Churchill Street Pollinator Garden, along with a corridor project to connect up these two gardens And that one is an ongoing project. So lots of things going on. This first garden was installed in 2016, and I've been basically, this has basically been my job for the last 7 years. I go out and monitor these gardens weekly, take photographs, monitor what sort of organisms are using the gardens. And it's been very interesting. I've learned a lot. So I'm going to share a lot of those lessons with you. So the way I would like to present things tonight is I want to talk about using broad concepts to guide your decisions. Okay, I'm going to give you kind of a framework of basically things that you can check off and say, is this going to work? Is this going to work? That can help guide your decisions. I'm not going to really talk about like, you should plant this plant or you should plant that plant, because not all plants will work in everybody's garden. But if you have a framework, you can apply that to everybody's gardens. We're going to talk about water. We're going to talk about trees and native plants. And then we're going to talk about maintenance and other considerations. So there's like this whole framework in which we're going to consider how water is used in the environment. So I get this a lot, how do you decide what to plant? How do you find out what's native? How do you find out what's drought tolerant? Do you have a plan? Do you just go to the nursery and you're maybe like this guy here, you see a nice bucket full of sort of dead pansies and everything, and this lady's happy to take his credit card, but he probably didn't have a plan before he went to the nursery. Maybe he was overwhelmed by too many choices, but these look good, so he decided to take those home. You need information to make good choices. And so what kind of information do we need? Is there a better way to make good plant choices for our dry climate? The answer is yes. There's a lot of great ways. I'm going to give you my best tips, sort of the cutting edge of how to get the most drought tolerant plants in your garden so that you can squeeze the last bit of usage out of every single drop of water in your garden. So I always tell people, make a plan. Think about things before you do it. This is key. Don't be like the guy with the dead pansies. Be like this guy. You may not need to wear a tie, but clearly he has a plan. He clearly has a list of something. He's talking it over with this guy here who's going to help them. So he's thought about it. So you're going to consider your situation and figure out how plants fit into the environment that will be the best fit for your situation. And so you can choose your plants and narrow your choices based on what you need and the situation before you shop. So have a plan, like make that grocery list before you go to the store. The same applies to plants. So what I like to tell people, and again, because every garden is different, it's better to use a system to help guide your decisions rather than telling you what specifically to plant, because not every single one of those plants are going to work in everyone's garden, but your system can work for everybody. Okay, so how do you make those choices? Well, let's talk about water a little bit. So one of the things that we're going to talk about water, we're going to talk about the first big concept here. So we know that outdoor irrigation accounts for most of a home's water use. Lawns are really thirsty. Non-native grasses can use up to 50% of outdoor water use. That's a lot. It's actually more than the indoor use of water for that house. So first big concept, if you're taking notes, write the word down, function. So you want to leverage function-based decision-making for optimizing water use outside. So think about how these spaces are functioning. What are you using your lawn for? Is it just there because you want a ground cover? Do you walk on it? What are you using it for? If you're just using it as a ground cover, there are so many other plants that will use almost no water and look green all year round. So, again, first big concept, consider the function of your spaces. What are you doing outside? Okay, this is one of those key concepts, consider function. And it's not just what you're doing, consider the function of the plant. Okay, and so do you need shade trees? Do you need fruit trees? Do you need ground covers? Do you need privacy screens? Consider the function of those plants. Those are what I like to say, the physical function of the plants, but I'm going to talk more about biological function in a moment. So you guys remember this from school, the water cycle, where and this is kind of an old diagram where they're only showing the natural cycle. They haven't included like the man-made stuff like parking lots and whatnot. But we're showing, you know, water evaporating from the ocean, going up in the atmosphere, coming down as rain, and going back into the ocean. But there's a part of this diagram that I think is very interesting, and that is plant uptake, plants and animals, and evapotranspiration. That is when plants release moisture into the air. These are biological functions, and it's a small part of this, but it's really, really important because the function of water is to keep things, living things alive. And so this is where, you know, I'm going to be spending my focus here. It's like, how do we optimize what's happening here? We don't really have a lot of control over this other stuff, but we do have control over what we plant.
So it looks like we lost Juanita. She must be having some technical difficulties, so we'll give it a minute or two, and hopefully she'll rejoin us. Sorry about this, folks. We're trying to reach Juanita, and hopefully she can reconnect quickly.
Okay, it looks like we have Juanita back. Yay.
Hey! I think you're on mute.
I think you're still muted, Juanita.
Okay, sorry about that. Don't know what happened. I hate that when that happens. All right, where was I? I was talking about water use. All right, current slide. Okay, am I still here?
You are here.
Okay, yay, all right. All right, so how can we find out how much water plants use? And so the water use classification of landscape species, online searchable database for plant factors of individual plant species.
Sorry,
And
Juanita, you might want to share your screen.
oh, shoot. Okay, hold on. All right. Go over here. Sorry, just doing so good there. All right. Let's try that. All right, go to that slide. You can see that now? Okay, sorry, everybody. Technology. Probably should do these in person again. Anyway, as I was saying, the water use classification of landscape species, it's an online searchable database for both native plants and non-native plants. And basically, you can go to this site and search for a plant, and they're all listed as a percentage of non-native turf grasses. So non-native turf grasses are 100%, and then the plant factor is a percentage of that. So very low water use is 0 to 10%, low is 20 to 30%, medium is 40 to 60%, so on and so forth. So, you know, if your second big concept here is, you know, I just want to get very low water use plants because I don't want to water anything. Here is where you go to find out. If you see a plant that you like, you can look it up. If it doesn't quite fit in with what you want to do with water, find another one that does. And there are so many plants to choose from, especially if you choose native plants. Well, look at that. So why California native plants? And I'm a little bit obsessed with California native plants. California is a biodiversity hotspot. Here in California, we have almost 8,000 species of plants to choose from. So if you're thinking, oh, I'm not going to find the plant that I want, there's probably a plant for you within the whole 8,000 or so species that we have. So abundant number of plants to choose from. Lots and lots of our plants are drought tolerant because they evolved here in California, which doesn't get much water in certain places. And we have so much biodiversity, probably because we have so many different ecological niches, places like the coast, deserts, the mountains, and so on. So we have a lot of different environments, but we also have a lot of different organisms, lots of different native bees. In California, we have approximately 1,600 species of native bees, more than any other state in the United States, which is awesome. They are responsible for helping us to have so many different kinds of plants. California, native plants, super amazing, lots of diversity, lots to choose from. And people go, okay, so if I'm going to find plants that are natives, where do I go? So what to plant from natives? So my go-to resource, and you can write this down, is calscape.org. And I just took a screenshot of their landing page here. And calscape.org is an easy to use searchable database done by the California Native Plant Society. Lots of information and resources. You can find California native plants, you can research them. And then from your research, create a plant palette of trees, shrubs, perennials, bulbs, vines, and succulents. Okay, every different thing that you can think of. And when you go to their page, you see that they've kind of categorized things for you into all plants, trees, shrubs, perennials, annuals, and so on and so forth. So you can search by type of plant. You can search by location, which is always best. You want to try to plant local if you can. And so you can like put in an address and find out what's going to work best for your situation. You can go up here to the tab, which is about, find nurseries. So where are these plants hiding? Where can you go to shop for them? Design and inspiration, butterflies. What's that? I'll talk about that in a moment. Lots of resources here. Really, this is my go-to place. And so butterflies. Now you guys remember I said that I studied ingestive behavior, eating and drinking. So really, is it any surprise that really I never asked the question? This is another big concept. My next big concept is not what to plant, but who to feed. Okay. And here in California, we have almost 1,400 species of butterflies and moths native to our state. And you're probably going, we're supposed to be talking about water. So what is this? What is this? Bugs and butterflies, caterpillars and larvae? And what is this? This is the good part. So we know that moisture goes into insects. Where are they getting that moisture from? They're getting it from plants, the ones that they eat. Insects are very specific about what they like. You know how monarchs only like milkweed. Okay. Most insects are very picky. And so we start talking about biology here a little bit. And we know that plant species need insects, pollinators, to survive. Pollinators move pollen around so that we can get seeds, so we can get more plants. We know that we can get variation of plant morphologies, the types of plant, like characteristics like colors of flowers, shapes of leaves, things like that. That happens faster when you have bees moving pollen around. Okay, so speciation happens more quickly when you have other organisms helping. So it's like the superpower of bees to make a lot of interesting morphology happen. So pollinators are spreading around all this genetic diversity that then is eaten by butterfly and moth larvae. Okay, so what I like to do is to rank the number of species that use the plant that I'm looking for to help decide who to feed. Because when you choose a native plant, you're also choosing those organisms that will use it. And so biological factors then become super important considerations in addition to non-biological abiotic factors like climate, geology, and water for determining what to plant. These things are so closely connected. So the broad concept here, consider biology in the water cycle, the plants and animals that are storing water in their living tissues and moving it through the environment in various processes. We want that process, literally keeping things alive, to be as efficient as possible. So water is keeping your plants alive, but boy howdy, it's keeping a lot of other things alive too. So this is what I call my photons to protein slide. We have energy from the sun coming down, going into the plants, getting eaten by caterpillars. And where do those caterpillars end up? They end up making baby birds. So this is how the sun's energy is accessed by these plants, and then is later transferred up into the food chain. And remember, I said before that insects are really picky about what they eat. So native plants basically only feed native insects. So if you plant a bunch of non-native things, you're not getting that transfer of energy into things like making baby birds, and you're not getting that transfer of moisture into things like caterpillars. Native plants will be a source of both energy and moisture for the things that eat it. Okay, so that's where the moisture is going. Okay, so remember I was talking about function. The big concept of function here. Plants aren't decorations. They can be very decorative, but plants are food and water sources. Okay, and this means that when you plant native, guaranteed your garden will attract many native pollinators and in turn insects and in turn birds. And so native plants become critical parts of sustaining life and conserving water. So whenever I go to a nursery, I look for plants that look like this, that have holes in them, because they're chewed up by these little caterpillars that then turn into butterflies, or if they're unfortunate, they become a meal for some other organism that then gets that moisture that organism got from the plant. So that's how you squeeze the best use out of every drop of water. You provide a way for it to be transferred through living tissues. So why is it important to see plants as food and water sources? And because your native plants will attract a variety of native pollinators and other insects, it's best to avoid making your garden an ecological trap, which is something that it's in the environment that attracts organisms, and because of that attraction, makes it easier for them to be killed through predation or other means. So don't invite all these species to your garden and then kill them with like pesticides and things like that, because you want to save the water that's in their bodies and keep that circulating through the environment. So everything is connected. Plants create that framework for these relationships with these other organisms. This is a huge, broad concept. You're going to create basically a scaffolding upon which water is circulating through these various living tissues. And so, we talk about like, maybe I just need to put some gravel down or maybe some bark chips and I'm good. I mean, you can do that depending on what your function is. If you want a walkable space, maybe gravel is good for walking. But if you want plants in your garden, people say, well, maybe I'll just put like 6 or 7. They won't use very much water. Well, plants get lonely. They like to have community. So when you have more plants, you're actually enhancing connectivity and complexity in the landscape. And the more that you increase the connectivity and the complexity, those plants will support each other, which leads to reduced irrigation needs. So it's kind of counterintuitive when you think that less water use doesn't mean less plants. Kind of the opposite is true. When you add more plants, you build a community of plants and other organisms that support each other and share water, nutrients, and information. So there's this interesting community that happens when you have a nice complex environment. And at a certain point, that garden becomes a self-assembling living system, and the water gets circulated through the living tissues of the things that are in that garden. I tell people, start with a minimum of like 20 native plant species local to your area. It's a good place to start. So big concepts here is that more organisms mean more sharing. Okay, so a plant community, and plant communities save water. And from the vegetation glossary on the California Native Plant Society website, is a group of plant species living together and linked together by their effects on one another and the responses to the environment they share. Typically, plant species that co-occur in a plant community show a definite association or affinity with each other. They get along, they play well together. And when they play well together, they share resources, and that, it's so cool, less water use. And so the takeaway insight here is that when you create a community of plants, and you don't have to do it all at once, you can start small and keep adding things to it, you get this self-assembling living system that kind of looks after itself. And when you're choosing plants, remember you're also choosing the organisms that are using those plants. So we have lots of plant communities And it's really fun to go, and you'll probably never see the environment the same after this. If you go to the redwood forest, it's like, wow, there's things growing here that aren't growing other places. Those things evolve together. That's a community. And so, like, for example, the northern tip of the Point Reyes seashore, wonderful plant community here of our native lupins, the maritime poppy, the yellow ones, and the beautiful Cirsium occidentale, one of our native thistles, the cobweb thistle, and then some looks like coyote bush here. And these plants are there because of the function of the pollinators, which are moving the genes around, so they're making seeds. And so you look at this particular environment and you see plants, but I also see the activity of those organisms that allow them to make the seeds. So again, think of function here. Bees are farmers whose function in the environment is to spread genetic diversity for other plants, for other insects to eat. So aim for the majority of the native plants in your garden to be local species and appropriate for your plant community. And you can find out your plant community by going to the CalScape website and typing in your address to see what's local to your area. So where to start? So here's, 8,000 species. Which ones do I choose? Here's a list of my local ones. How do I choose? So there is the concept of keystone species. And I touched on this a little earlier when I said I try to choose plants that have a lot of organisms using them rather than only a few. So what we try to do, and this is one of those big concepts to help guide decisions, keystone plant species. And these are plant species that form the backbone of habitat resources, food, shelter, and nesting sites. They help other plant species to survive, and they provide the food for dozens or hundreds of types of caterpillar species upon which countless other animals depend. So if you can get that moisture from that plant's tissues into a lot of other organisms, you're creating lots more connections. That's how you create connections in the environment, which makes things a lot more resilient. See how I'm trying to pull my fingers apart? So you're basically weaving something that's really complicated, makes it less easy to unravel. Even if you lose a couple of plants, you still have the major framework left. So try to pick keystone species first and try to include at least a few of those in your garden, because that's going to help you really efficiently use water to have those plants that are forming the center stone of the stone arch, holding everything up. And they really assist in assembling that living system. So keystone species, one of those big broad concepts. Okay, sequence. So I say start with trees and large plants first. Trees, 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 plants and trees. Fit in as many trees as possible. Then your shrub layer. That should compose over about 60% of all the plants. I like to focus on evergreen shrubs, the ones that don't lose their leaves all at once, because they just look better. And over time, remember, don't be overwhelmed. Start with a few things, but just keep adding. Some people think, I'm done. Don't be done. Keep adding things to your environment. And over time, add in as many grasses, perennials, bulbs, succulents, and ground covers and vines as possible. Plant during the late fall and winter for the best results during the rainy seasons when the ground is cool and moist. Use smaller plant sizes, 4-inch pots or 1 gallons or seeds. If you're digging holes, a 4-inch pot goes into a smaller hole than a 1 gallon pot or a 5 gallon or a 15 gallon. It's just easier. And after planting thousands of plants, I'm always like, can I just throw some seeds and call it a day? And you can, but really a 4-inch pot is a great way to go. And then to protect plants as they establish, I like to use physical barriers like chicken wire to protect the small plants, because squirrels love to dig up what I just planted. So there's a sequence, big stuff to small stuff, and then keep adding things over time. Okay, so a few things about layout. How do you get the right number of plants? So you can measure your front yard, you know, if it's 60 by 40 or something. You can lay it out on graph paper, and you know, you can have each square of that graph equaling 1 foot. So you can then draw in the mature diameter of plants. And this is really helpful for deciding how many things to plant. So let's say these yellow plants here are 7 of whatevers. And you see how, and they grow to be about maybe 18 inches in diameter. So draw a circle that covers about 1.5 of these squares. And each of these circles basically just a little bit touches or overlaps a little bit. And that will help with your spacing and your quantity of plants. So you'll know how many. Remember, make a plan. So you go, okay, I need 7 of the yellows. I need 3 of the blues, 3 of the greens, and so on and so forth. So what I always like to do is, remember, you got to get in there and take care of things, draw in a pathway, and then add those plants at their mature diameters. And trust me, when they say it's going to be 12 feet wide, it eventually will be 12 feet wide. So draw at your mature diameter. Even if things look sparse to start with, let them go for a couple of years, see how big they get. But that's how you plan for things. You literally make a plan, and that way you get numbers, quantities, layout, and you're good to go. Start with those keystone trees. And big concept here, I keep pushing trees because trees actually help save water. And I can't really stress how important trees are to the environment. They absorb water and release it into the air. Remember that evapotranspiration circle that we saw? And that cools and cleans the air. They form half of that rain cycle. When they team up with the oceans that are just evaporating, the trees are releasing water into the air, and that water goes through the atmosphere, just like the water that comes off the ocean. And that circulates across the planet in the atmosphere. Trees improve water quality by filtering rainwater and slowing down impacts of heavy rain, and they reduce flooding and stabilize soil. And they are food sources for organisms. So trees, 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 start with trees. Here we have our coast live oak, Quercus agrifolia, probably not the best plant for a backyard or front yard because they get big. And here's my husband, he's 6'3". So big tree, probably too big for a yard, but there are probably smaller trees that we can use. We know that clouds form more often over forested areas and non-forested areas. So again, you know, you're releasing that moisture into the atmosphere, forming literally their own clouds. And we know that the cooling effect of clouds and carbon dioxide captured by trees more than offset the reflection of the sun during times when the deciduous trees are bare. Deciduous trees lose their leaves all at once. And you know, the bonus, the positive effects of trees outweighs all of those, any sort of negative effects. So trees, did I mention trees? Yes, trees, trees, trees. One of the trees that works really great here in the Santa Clara Valley is the Quercus lobata, or the valley oak. And I always push oaks because no trees come close to delivering all the ecosystem services that oaks provide. They're super low water use. They used to be about 61% of the tree cover in Santa Clara Valley. Now it's about 1%. They are a keystone species. The valley oak actually is deciduous, which means it drops all its leaves each year, which you just leave underneath the tree because that supports the health of the tree. They have a taproot that goes down into the groundwater, and then lateral surface roots that will spread that water out to other plants that can use it. So they're basically like a pump pumping up the groundwater to these other plants. You can plant native plants underneath like Monardella, and non-native plants under an oak tree actually are not good for that tree. Oaks are insect factories. Remember that moisture going into those little insect bodies. Oaks can live up to 600 years and they add value to real estate. So if you have room for an oak, most people don't. This is the Hopkins Avenue pollinator garden. You know, if you've got like a really big front yard, you could probably stick an oak in there, and they actually do grow pretty fast. Surprising, really. I always like to tell people, you know, if you don't want to pick up any sort of leaves, if you don't like the look of leaves, you can use evergreen trees and shrubs if you want less leaf litter. They look green all year. Prune occasionally if you have branches that are blocking views or whatever. Two different looks. Remember, what's going to work best for your situation? What is your aesthetic? Do you want to have trees that are leafy all year? You know, that's up to you. I like a lot of evergreen trees, but I also like leaf litter because it's another form of biological water storage because leaves are spongy. They suck up water during rain. But you said, okay, Juanita, you know, we're going to talk about specific plants, but I actually am. People often say to me, if I can't fit an oak, what trees can I fit into my yard if we have existing trees or not much space? We have a very small yard, and it's kind of a jungle right now, but I have managed to squeeze in a dozen more species, and this isn't even all of the trees that we have in our yard. We have Acer macrophyllum, the big leaf maple, Cercocarpus betuloides, mountain mahogany, great tree, evergreen, beautiful tree, small, fits in, it's kind of upright and narrow, so it really fits into a side yard nicely. And oh my gosh, a willow that I water by hand. So this particular tree might be higher water use, but by hand watering just this one, I still use less water in our yard every year. We have the elderberry. We have Prunus ilicifolia. These trees don't really like water during the summertime at all. And it's evergreen, glossy green leaves, look good all the time. We've got Acer negundo. We've got our existing street tree, which is a Modesto ash. We have hazelnuts because who doesn't like filberts? I love hazelnuts. So we got a couple of those. We got Prunus, we got Arctostaphylos, we got redbuds, we've got Toyon, Heteromelies arbutifolia. If you want a tree that needs like 0 water during the summertime, plant a Toyon. Those things, I planted one in our backyard, watered it once, and then I just ignored it. It's like, if you're going to be a diva and need my help, forget it. Everything seems to be surviving. So, you know, lots of choices. I just like all of them. So my problem is I want all the plants, but you will find one that will work for your situation, depending on what your aesthetic is. Remember, second, choose those native shrubs. And these are actually shrubs in my home garden, you know, evergreen ones that keep those leaves on all year, drop maybe a few during the winter, that have that lush appearance, the glossy leaves, Vaccinium ovata, our native huckleberry. These have delicious berries on them, pretty low water use, coffee berry, which are not edible, but look at those glossy leaves. Arctostaphylos, our manzanita, comes in ground covers, shrub, and tree form, and super glossy leaves. Some of the varieties do. Ribes viburnifolium looks good all the time. You know, again, native gardens don't have to look dry. These are juicy, juicy plants. Speaking of juicy, let's talk about succulents. Dudleya. So we're going to talk about using that immense power of biology to bring and keep moisture in the environment. Remember, this is one of those big concepts. We're going to use tap-rooted plants to draw on the water table and deep soil moisture. We're going to use native succulents, bulbs, fleshy crowned plants, and encourage animals to keep moisture in the garden. Remember, these organisms like Mr. Fence Lizard here, he's a bag of moisture. He could also be a meal for a bird, but he's getting his moisture from insects that have gotten their moisture from the plants they ate. So again, he's holding moisture in the garden. And when you pair these powerful biological tools that we have with non-biological ways to reduce water loss using mulch and shade, rocks, you're going to keep moisture in the garden, and that's going to reduce your irrigation needs. Okay, so let's talk more about succulents. Really into succulents these days because the word succulent comes from the Latin word succus or succus, depending on how you say it, meaning juice or sap. Again, moisture. And so a simple and broad definition of succulents: plants that store water in their tissues, making them very resistant to drought and super low maintenance. So like most of these need no summer water at all. They don't like it, they'll rot. And so we have lots of different kinds. We have cacti, we have Lewisia, agaves, sedums, crassula, leptocines, dudleas, bulbs. So lots of things that store water in their tissues, because that's what water is for, keeping things alive. And here in California, we have 188 succulents to choose from. So, you know, go crazy. There's lots to choose from. And I prefer the dudleas myself. There are 45 species of dudleas here in California. Super easy to raise from seed, and super juicy. You want to plant them and other leafy succulents at an angle so that they shed water. That will help avoid rotting. You don't want to water directly onto the foliage. And you can plant at a mounded, well-drained rocky bed with some afternoon shade for these dudleas, lovely little plants. And they seem to defy gravity, and they grow on vertical surfaces amongst mosses and lichens. You know, I mean, this is the epitome of low maintenance, low water use, water storage on a vertical surface. So dudleas, great little succulents. And they come in a lot of different forms. The different forms go dormant some degree during the summertime. So here's one, and these are from my home garden. This is Dudlea virens, Hassii. In March, when we've had lots of rain, the tissues puff up and they're full of water. And then versus September, when it's super dry, they still look pretty good and they still have water in them. Okay. Here's another one. This is Dudlea bretonii. In March versus September, when it's full of water during the rains and sending up a bloom spike, versus September when it's kind of retracted. Okay, the water has gone out and some of the lower leaves have shriveled up, but these are protecting that inner core where there's water storage. So that's the response that some succulents can make. And you can mix them in with evergreen plants and you get that lush look. So here's a beautiful little sedum growing among ground cover Arctostaphylos and some other things. But I mean, look how good that looks. You know, again, I wasn't going to tell you specific things, but here's an example of that concept of like water storage, glossy leaves, you know, and really using like almost no water. And so when you have these native plant gardens, one of the goals, additional to saving water, is to optimize the opportunities for organisms to complete their life cycles. Remember, we want things to continue to spread moisture in the environment. So we want to allow time for biological processes to take place, which means mating dances like these two, I believe these are Icaricia acmon, the Ackman blue butterfly. This is at the Hopkins Avenue garden. They like buckwheat to lay their eggs on, which is this plant here, Eriogonum ellatifolium. And so you want to support those relationships between the native plants and the organisms that use them. And allow these creatures to complete their life cycles, mating, laying eggs, turning into larvae, pupating, and then turning into butterflies and so forth. And so you get, with native plants, this is what you get. You get beautiful things fluttering around. Okay, so you're going, okay, so we're going to plant the keystone species. We're going to mix in some evergreens in there to keep things looking nice. Going to go with those very low water use plants. We're going to plant during the rainy season, a few trees. How do I take care of all of this? The good news is that a native plant garden is less maintenance than a non-native garden with a lawn. You don't have to mow. Okay, so that gets rid of that whole thing. If you don't have a lawn, basically your major thing is to, once you get the plants established, is to keep weeds at bay. So things that you don't want growing in there, like ivy, some of the nastier invasive grasses that we have, just pull those out. Don't let them go to seed. When you first put the plants in during the cool, moist season, you're going to irrigate to establish those about once a week or so. You want to encourage the roots to search for water. So water just outside of that root ball. Prune sparingly. So you don't really even have to prune, but if you want to control for fire safety, you can do that. You don't have to fertilize, so you're going to save money there. Amend sparingly. You can just use leaves for mulch. If you don't like the way that looks, you can put like a 1 bark chip thick full of mulch on top of the leaves. Just leave them where they are to hold it in place. You can leave bare areas of dirt for those bee species that nest underground. 70% nest underground. You don't use leaf blowers in planted areas. You can use those on the hardscape, like your sidewalks and patios and driveways, to kind of clean things off. But you don't want to be blowing leaf litter and any sort of debris away from underneath of these plants, because when these organisms pupate, they often drop off of the plant down into the soil and the leaf litter underneath, and that's where they hang out and kind of wait until they can emerge as a butterfly or a moth or something. And the birds will find those little bags of moisture and protein and eat them. One of the best things that birds like to do is get into the leaf litter and look for these treats. And it shouldn't have to be said, but don't use pesticides, herbicides, or fungicides. Remember, we're using biology, big concept here, to keep moisture in the environment. So we want things to like get in there, eat the plants, keep the moisture in their bodies, get their life cycle going, so that the moisture stays in the environment, in the living tissues. So super easy to take care of things. Again, you know, don't create a trap. So don't, because your garden will be very attractive with these native plants. Super attractive. It will be like very busy with like pollinators flying around, butterflies everywhere. And so you want to try to minimize the impacts of things that might keep them from completing their life cycles, like outdoor lights at night. Moths are attracted to those things. 60% of moths can die at night in a single night that are attracted to an outdoor light. So you turn off your outside lights or put in a yellow light, put blackout shades in your windows to keep down the light pollution. You can just leave the leaves where they fall underneath plants. The leaves will rot and won't smother plants. Plants come up right through leaves, and leaves dissipate over time as they're broken down. You don't need to use pesticides, herbicides, or fungicides. You don't want those things getting into the ground where organisms are living. And then, you know, reduce your use of gasoline as much as possible by not using a mower. You don't have to mow your non-existent lawn, and you know, electric leaf blowers if you want to clean off your patios. So really a lot less work to maintain these gardens. So finally, I know we covered a lot of these broad concepts, and probably you're going, I never thought about using biology to save water. But once you see how like the connection, when you go from the photons to the proteins, that's how you keep the water in. the more that you understand those ecosystem services that these organisms are providing, and the more that you save money on water and maintenance by using these organisms, these plants, to kind of set up this framework for you, the more you're going to see and understand those interrelationships in nature, and you can optimize the productivity of your drought tolerant native plant garden, squeezing as much use out of a single drop of water, which will lead then to an abundance of life, both plants and animals. And that's going to enhance your appreciation and your role in caring for nature's complex beauty. And with that, let's talk about any questions that people might have.
So before we start the Q&A, I just want to say thank you, Juanita, for the amazing presentation that you just provided. I also want to thank all the attendees that have joined us tonight. And I would like to once again mention that if you are interested in any of the rebate programs that we offer here at Mid-Peninsula Water District that may help you save water within your landscape, whether it be our rain barrel program or our lawn be gone or our smart irrigation or rain garden, you're more than welcome to contact us here in the district and participate in those programs. And so if you haven't already submitted a question to Juanita, go ahead and do so. I'll start with the first question that was inserted tonight. So the first question we have, Juanita, is someone asked anonymously, some of my manzanita leaves are yellowing and falling off. I presume that thanks to this year's heavy rain, they are in well-drained soil. Is this the end for them, or can they recover?
So without knowing how exactly old these manzanitas are, you know, they don't live forever. Some live longer than others. I would, you know, I would see if there's any new growth coming. If there's new growth on them, then I wouldn't worry about it too much. These plants are pretty tough. You know, I would just take a kind of a wait and see attitude on them and see if they're going to push out any new growth.
Okay. So the next question, Pika asked, I converted my lawn to a drought tolerant native planting 1.5 years ago, but did not take advantage of the rebate offered by Bosca. Can I retroactively apply now? So it all depends on what water district service area you're living in. I would reach out to your water district or service provider. They would have more context. But personally, for Mid-Peninsula Water District, we unfortunately cannot grant that rebate. We ask our participants to follow a step-by-step procedures with us through these rebates. And so Victoria is asking, where can I find a list of keystone plants?
So the California Native Plant Society, the Santa Clara Valley chapter, has some great resources on their CalScape page. And the way that I determine what a keystone species is to rank those plants by the number of butterflies or moths that they feed. The ones that feed more, like 1,000 or so, or whatever it is, those are more keystone than others. The National Wildlife Federation also has that resource as well. That's something I've talked about in the past, where they do have that. But that's basically how you rank those things. So the quick way to find a keystone species is to just see how many butterfly and moth larvae it feeds. If it feeds like 75 or something like that, then you know that that's a keystone species. But in our area, the quick guide to keystone species are things like the oaks, of course, the prunus species, the cherry species. Willow is another one that is really good. Arctostaphylos is a keystone species as well. And the eriogonums, the buckwheats are keystone. You know, and they may not have all of the various organisms listed that feed on particular plants. You may see other things eating that are not eating the plants that are not included on those lists, but that's how I determine those things. But the ones that I mentioned, the oaks, the prunus, the eriogonums, the arctostaphylos, the willows, are really keystone. Especially, prunus seems to be really useful. But you see multiple organisms using a plant, and you include that. They're just, it's like, how do you decide? I must have all of them. But if you can fit in an oak somehow, if you don't have room for a full-size valley oak or a coast live oak, you might want to try something like a scrub oak, which is basically a large shrub that you can shape into a small tree form. That would be a good one to include. So your oaks, your prunus, your salix or willow, arctostaphylos, and the what's the other one? Oh, the eriogonums, the buckwheats. Yes.
Okay, well, we had one more question come in from one of the attendees, Deepika again. They asked, I want to plant ground covers that my dogs can run on. They're not fans of mulch, unfortunately. Can you recommend any that can take foot traffic?
Yeah, so one of the things that I have planted is Achillea millefolium, or yarrow, which is a fine textured ground cover. It likes to be kind of like in a little bit more shade sometimes, and it spreads by runners. It can be mowed. You can trim it with loppers. And so what that plant is good for, that kind of forms a framework in the ground in which you can plant some other things. So you could potentially plant in some native grasses that can be sheared off and walked on. When they're established, you don't want to like plant things and then release the hounds on it or walk on it right away. You want things to like give it a year or so to establish, and then you can walk on it after that. So a yarrow with potentially some grasses in there, things that can be stepped on other than like yarrow. I get this question a lot. I planted like blue-eyed grass, which is Sisyrinchium bellum, which is a member of the iris family, has a blue blossom. Once it's done blooming, you can like shear it off, and that plant is very tough. So things like that would be a good place to start, but yarrow works pretty well for a lawn substitute.
Okay, it looks like we had one more attendee question come in. Living in Belmont, we have 2 redwood trees in our front yard. They have grown and are now so large that many of the existing non-natives are not getting enough sun, and we'd like to replace them with natives. Do you have any recommendations for plants under and in the shade of redwood trees?
Ferns. Ferns love to be under redwoods. In fact, so redwoods are a big community plant. They have, they like to be with their buddies. Redwood they don't have a tap root, they have surface roots. So they like to hold each other up with their roots. But what I like to do with a redwood environment is to plant ferns like Woodwardia fimbriata, the giant chain fern, or Polyspicum munitum under there, which is super tough to grow. You can plant Asarum caudatum, which is the native ginger. You can plant lilies under your trees. Lilies are a great plant to go underneath redwoods because they're so pretty. There's native oxalis that can go under there. I would go and visit some redwood forests and take a look and see what's growing under there. The native huckleberry will grow nicely under redwoods. There's some other goodies. Our native violets. There are a couple of different kinds of native violets that like to be under redwoods. And you might even get a little crazy by maybe getting a nice redwood log to rot underneath those trees, because that's what redwoods like. They like to have like a fallen log to like decompose, so they can have that over the centuries to nosh on. And that will also invite other organisms in and help maintain that moisture in that community. It just adds another layer of complexity. So lots of different things can go underneath redwoods.
Okay, well, looks like we haven't had another attendee question come in. I'll give some of the attendees some time to get their questions in. I'm going to ask a question that I'm curious about. Do you have any recommendations for your figuring out how to design your irrigation system for your native garden? Or do you need any sprinklers or drip at all?
Well, so that's a very nuanced question. And the answer is it depends on what you've planted. I do know that some designers will design a garden without irrigation, which is mind-blowing. And actually, there's a really good resource on the CalScape page that talks about how to make that happen in terms of the structure of the garden. Some people will, when they do that, if they want a really low water use garden, will install it without irrigation and hand water the first year, and then basically let it go on rainfall after that. That's a thing that happens. Personally, when I design irrigation systems, I know everybody is like drip, drip, drip. And I find real issues with drip irrigation, because if you have little emitters, the squirrels find those and they eat them, and it's a maintenance nightmare. So you can get pop-up spray heads that are like micro sprays to water things. That is my preference when I do irrigation systems. And with a micro spray system like that, that's not like, you can have like a main irrigation pipe coming in with a lot of like PVC or like polyvinyl chloride laterals that are like flexible tubing that you can remove later. But irrigation systems are problematic because people forget where they are. And it takes just one shovel going into the ground to break a pipe, to break a spray head, So I always like to reduce the maintenance that I do as much as possible. And so, I try to design gardens myself to have as little irrigation installed as possible. So that would be my recommendation, is like, go with only what you absolutely positively need and hand water the rest. And then don't water things that don't like it during the summertime. Or if you don't like the way things are looking and you think, you can do what they call the dust off once like every 6 weeks in the summertime. Once things are established, just like spray everything off just to reduce the dust, But my recommendation for irrigation is only plant those things that are low water use, and only install the minimum irrigation needed to get it to establish. And then over time, just add things so that those things start sharing that water, and incorporate things that will help channel the water into the ground so that the plants can access it. Things like rain gardens. Yay. It's great that you guys have that rebate, because nothing is better than a rain garden, because rain likes to go where it's the low ground. And those things become biological hotspots for all kinds of activity. So rain garden, good. Irrigation, minimum. Low water use.
Well, thank you for that. If any of the attendees are interested in irrigation and the installation of irrigation. We'd like to remind you that we do here at Mid-Peninsula Water District offer water efficient sprinkler heads, and as well as many of the other BOSCA agencies throughout the region. Another question I have is I've heard some people do laundry to landscape gray water systems. Do you recommend people installing these systems in our area?
It's not my preference. I think that they can be perhaps a little bit problematic. I know that people do those systems. I personally do not design and install those. So I'm not the best person to ask about those systems. I have considered them over the years. But for me, it wouldn't be my preference, though I do know that other people do design and install those. I don't know how well native plants would like that water. I have not tried that particular method with native plants. So I don't know the answer to that question in terms of how natives would like it.
Okay. It looks like we had one more question come in from the attendees. Linda is asking, what exactly is a rain garden? So the definition of a rain garden, I guess.
So a rain garden is an area where rainwater can collect in a garden. It can run into a very wide, flat, shallow area. If you want something where you have the water, it can spread out, slow it down and spread it out so it can go into the ground. We're not talking about like a swimming pool type of situation where the water's staying for a long time. We're hoping the water is going to go into the ground within a matter of hours. But it's basically a shallow depression where you can direct rain from your downspouts, rain from your hardscape into these planted areas. And you can plant up those shallow depression with plants that like a little extra moisture, because that's where the moisture will go when you have everything kind of flowing into those areas.
Thank you. Linda, if that is something that you're interested in, and you live in the Mid-Peninsula Water District service area, feel free to reach out. This is definitely one of the rebates that we offer. If you do not live within our service area, I know that many of the other BOSCA agencies are offering this as well. So looks like we haven't had another attendee question yet, so I'll throw you another one. Are all of these or most of these great native plants that you're mentioning, are these available in local nurseries, or are these things that you are often having to special order?
So I look far and wide for native plants, and you typically do not find native plants in like the big box stores like Home Depot or, places that have like Orchard Supply. They typically don't have a native plant section. I know that one of the local nurseries here, Summer Winds Nursery, does have native plant sections, but native plants tend to be kind of a specialty item. I know that Capital Wholesale has those, but typically when you're looking for native plants, you want to go to a native plant nursery, and the calscape.org website has a list of those. And there are several that I like to go to in the area. There's like Yerba Buena Nursery that's on the way out to Half Moon Bay. There's East Bay Wilds over in Oakland, which is super cool. There's Oaktown Native Nursery up in Berkeley. There's Linda Vista Natives down in San Jose. So they exist. I do order plants if my local nursery doesn't have them. And another one. So the Grassroots Ecology, which is a nonprofit, they have a nursery up in the Foothill Park Preserve. You order those things online, you do your PayPal, and then you go and pick them up, go up to the Foothill Park Preserve, drive out to the very end. They have a lot of great plants right now. You basically can look at the inventory that they have online and um, uh, decide, if you want, what they have, and or go to another nursery that might have what you want. But there are a lot of them. They're super fun to go to because um, you just you see plants that you may see out in the wild and you don't know what they are. Then you see them in the nursery and you go, oh, I remember that. And then vice versa, you go back out on your next hike and you say, I know that plant. I saw that plant at XYZ nursery. So it just makes it so much more fun sometimes when you can go out into nature and it's like you're seeing all these plant friends. It's like you know them personally.
Um, Another question is for those that are wanting to install an irrigation system or an efficient irrigation system into their landscape, but they're still feeling overwhelmed by the project. What do you recommend for these people that are looking to redesign their landscape?
I recommend professional help. If you're overwhelmed, and this is the answer I give for a lot of different things where people feel overwhelmed, it's like hire somebody who is trained and has the right equipment and does this for a living, and they will efficiently solve your problem for you. And there are people who do native plant design and installation and irrigation systems. So they know how to efficiently plan and install things for you. Um, you know, this comes up a lot. People sometimes feel overwhelmed, like, how do I do this? How do I design it? It's like, if you're overwhelmed, go to an expert to get it done for you. And then you can just kind of enjoy it later and add things over time once the basic stuff is put in. Um, if you're overwhelmed, go to the professional help every time. It's well worth it.
And then one of the anonymous attendee questions just came in, and they asked, can you please repeat the name of the nonprofit nursery in Foothills Park Preserve?
Yes, that is the Grassroots Ecology Nursery. And they have such a great website showing the plants that they have, because they show for many of the plants where they sourced them from. So you know exactly where they came from, which is super cool. It's just like, if you know it, you will actually know if it's like super local. And it's a nice drive going out there and going to the nursery, go through the park, maybe have a picnic, and enjoy the whole process, right?
So Juanita, you mentioned hazelnuts earlier.
Yes,
Are there any other good native fruit or nut producing trees that you would recommend?
absolutely. So as I mentioned before, Vaccinium ovatum, our native huckleberry, they're like these little tiny, really yummy blueberries. And, mine, they grow in shade. Mine actually that I have in my yard are in full sun with afternoon shade. And the secret to getting them to grow quickly is to give them cottonseed meal, which is like candy to them. And I end up with so many of those yummy, yummy blueberries. So that's one tasty treat. Another one is our native strawberry, which is smaller than the regular strawberry, but it has about 8 times the flavor. So that's super tasty. So those are just a couple that I like. There are others, and you know, trying to think of besides the hazelnut. The thing about hazelnuts is that you need a male and a female tree, and you don't know what they are until they're like all grown up. So, so I think I have like 3 of them planted in my yard now, and I'm hoping that I got a mix of a boy and a girl, so we'll see. Um, but yeah, the strawberries, not to be missed. They're really, really something.
So what would you suggest for someone that has some non-native plants within their garden that they really like and might want to keep, and some others that they might want to replace. How would you suggest going about a project like that?
So I would find the most unattractive part of your yard, um, that is, you're feeling very frustrated with it. Maybe it's ugly for some reason. And, look to see what kind of a plant or what kind of tree, I would plant a tree, what tree would solve that problem for you. So say you have some ivy, for example, and the ivy looks terrible. There are a lot of rats living in it. You know, I would have somebody professionally remove it because it sucks to remove ivy. And then I would plant a tree that fits in my yard that either gives me shade. Maybe it's deciduous if you want that. Maybe it's flowering. And maybe it blocks the view of the neighbor's backyard, whatever function again, whatever you need to like solve a problem for you. It's like pick a small space and work on a small area first and like kind of convert one area before you move on to the next. I mean, some people like will put plants here and there, which you can do. You can kind of tuck things in. It might be easier to just do one small area or one section. If you're not really sure, how to go about things, you could maybe even start with a pot and plant some succulents in it, or a plant that can grow, a native plant that actually can grow in a pot, and kind of get familiar with it if you don't have any natives. Lots of ways to become familiar, kind of like with their aesthetic and their kind of like how they are, their vibe, as it were, their personalities, and go to a few native plant nurseries, talk to the people that run them. Usually they're really ready to talk about the plants because they love them so much, and they're usually pretty obsessed with them too. Use get familiar with the plants. If you see something that you like out in the wilds, you can use an app like iNaturalist to identify it. And you like maybe see a vine and you see that growing, you think, oh, that would be nice on the arbor. And you have take a picture of it, upload it to iNaturalist. It's like, oh, that's Vitis californica, our native grape. Yet another tasty treat, right? So, and that one looks great on an arbor and is a wonderful species. And they're very vigorous plants. So, it's just like, again, think about the function, think about what problems that you have that you want to solve by having these plants. And if you're still overwhelmed, remember, professional help is available.
Well, thank you, Juanita. Well, before we wrap up, I have one more question for you. Walking around my neighborhood personally, I see sometimes that these succulents can kind of take over the landscape, or kind of can multiply quickly. What would you say to someone that wants succulents but doesn't want them to completely take over the landscape? Is there a certain species they should avoid?
Avoid non-native succulents. Those non-natives will take over. Our native succulents are actually very well behaved, and they don't grow so quickly that they're going to take over. They're actually a little bit slow growing. And so, like I mentioned before, my personal favorite of the succulents are the Dudleas, and super easy to grow. They stay pretty small. They grow slowly. So I know the succulents that you're talking about, some of them are just not good. And those are not the ones that are not native to the area. And they will kind of become garden thugs,
Well, as we hit 8:01, I just want to say thank you so much for all of the information you've provided today to us here at Mid-Peninsula Water District and to our attendees. We truly appreciate all the knowledge and information that you've passed on. And to all the attendees still on the call, we highly suggest, if you live within our service area, to reach out and try to utilize some of the rebates we offer, and to try and make your landscape a little bit more water efficient if you're interested. So with that, we'll conclude tonight's call, and thank you again. Is there anything you'd like to say, Kat, before we leave?
Just thank you to everyone, and thank you especially to Juanita. This was wonderful.
Thanks, guys. It was fun. And sorry about the technical glitch.
It was very short. It worked out well.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you, and thanks again to all the attendees. Have a great night.
Good night.